Hi, welcome back to Cybersecurity for Everyone. I'm Dr. Charles Harry. In our last episode, we talked about the origins of the World Wide Web and the development of the early browser technologies. In this episode, I want to talk about how that technology has been further developed over the last 20 years and why that matters for cybersecurity. The commercialization of the World Wide Web in the 1990s led to eventually the first tech bubble burst in 2000. But there's a growing user base of the World Wide Web, and certainly new technologies are driving the growth of that user base in the early aughts. We see the development and introduction of home Wi-Fi routers. We see monetization of advertisements by Google. And so the monetization of search becomes incredibly an important driver of the development of a user base for the internet. And so something called Web 2.0 starts to emerge. In the early 1990s and through most of that decade, web content was static. We're very used to now being able to book a car online or a hotel or buy an airplane ticket to fly anywhere around the world. We're used to being able to pay all of our bills online. But in the early days of the World Wide Web, most of the information was static, meaning you couldn't interact with the content. It was really useful if you wanted to get information about a particular product or service, but if you actually wanted to do something, it wasn't very helpful. And so what we see is by 2004, more interactive content starts to emerge. Blogs and wikis and some of the early social networking sites start to come online. So a lot more interaction with users, a lot more content actually being built online. And so Web 2.0 really marks this acceleration of daily usage by consumers. Instead of the World Wide Web simply being a bunch of billboards or advertisements, it is now becoming much more ingrained in day-to-day use by consumers, by ordinary people. And so growth in user interactions by companies such as MySpace, Amazon, Facebook, Friendster. Many of you probably have never heard of Friendster, but it was one of these early social networking sites. This greater demand drives really two important trends: cloud and mobile computing. So let's talk about the first trend, cloud computing. In the early days of computing, computers were really big and expensive. They filled entire rooms. People really couldn't afford them. But as technology became more affordable and the technology of miniaturization of computing technology takes hold, those computers become much more portable and they're much more usable by folks at home. So businesses and consumers start buying their own computers instead of leasing or renting computing time. And yet, while most people have access to computers in their homes and in their businesses, the really big and expensive computers still remain out of reach. And so while those systems have been around, the movement back to shared resources, the ability for consumers or businesses to gain access to those really powerful machines starts to make a comeback in the early aughts or in the mid-aughts under the name the cloud. And really all we're talking about, and we'll talk more specifically about cloud technology in another episode. What I want to highlight here is that there are some really expensive machines that have really, significant capabilities where people want to be able to leverage that for some particular purpose. And we've now renamed that concept the cloud. Amazon in 2006 develops a suite of tools that allows users to access these really powerful systems. And now we see a whole suite of other companies that are engaged in similar cloud technologies. Amazon Web Services, or what we call AWS, Azure, which is a Microsoft product, Google Cloud, etc., are all examples of cloud systems that basically are allowing users to gain access to these really powerful systems and not have to buy it themselves. That's all it is. But there's also a second trend, mobile computing. And mobile web technology has its origins in the late 1990s. And frankly, even maybe a little bit earlier than that. But mobile networks in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, are just not fast enough to be able to quickly download or upload data on the World Wide Web. That begins to change. And so by the end of the aughts, faster third generation, or what we call 3G technology, allows for greater speeds. And by the end of the decade, in July 2007, Apple introduces the iPhone, an absolute revolution in mobile computing. And so by this last decade, we are creating a network society. And we're seeing growing connectivity, home Wi-Fi systems that allow for you to connect your Roomba with your smart light bulbs, as well as your laptops and your mobile devices. We're seeing a broader set of social connections and expression, social networks like Facebook, blogs, wikis, and other communities that people are interacting with on a regular basis. And then, of course, we're seeing supporting utilities and sensors. We're seeing the ubiquitous adoption of cloud computing. We're seeing the development of what are called the Internet of Things, all these devices in your home and in businesses that are connected to the internet. And so by the end of the 2010s, modern society is leveraging the internet as a global commons. In this decade, where are we going? We're seeing the increasingly use of advanced analytics, things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. We're seeing the introduction of autonomous vehicles and smart road infrastructure. And of course, we're seeing the rise of smart cities and networked critical infrastructure. It's becoming much more prevalent. And who knows what this decade is going to give us in addition. So all this together is painting the picture of the internet becoming not simply as a tool, not simply as a utility, but actually part of modern society. It's part of the fabric of our institutions and our society writ large. So why are we even talking about this? This is a cybersecurity course. Why are we talking about the history? Because the history is important if you want to understand vulnerabilities. Because remember, the internet was conceived, built, scaled, and commercialized by academics, the government, and the private sector. And a lot of that technology is kind of old, 40 to 50 years old, in fact. A lot of the basic foundational concepts of the internet were developed in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. And so some of that technology that was developed 40 or 50 years ago includes vulnerabilities that still stay with us today. And when you couple those vulnerabilities with complexities in the interconnections of billions of devices and billions of people around the world, it creates the recipe for potentially very large-scale public concerns. So what can we take away from this episode? First, what we start to see in the early aughts is the movement away from purely static content that we see in the 1990s to something that's much more interactive. We also see the drive of cloud and mobile technology in that decade. And in the last decade, we've seen the adoption of internet technology as not only simply a tool or a utility, but really at the core of modern society. In our next episode, we're going to explore how data actually moves from one point of the earth to another. And this becomes fundamentally important when we want to understand hacking and how those vulnerabilities in these various protocols can be exploited. I hope to see you next time.